Put wheel chocks behind your rear wheels and support your car on jack stands. Next, remove your wheel and set it off to the side. Now remove your spring clip. You can either do it by hand like I did or with some sort of tool to pry it off. Now remove the two dust cover boots. You can pop them off with a little screwdriver. Inside of each of these there will be a bolt. In our case it was a 7mm Allen. So just use a wrench and remove those two bolts and the caliper will come off. When you remove the caliper, set it somewhere where it's not hanging by the brake line because it'll stretch out and bleed. Now you can remove the pads. The pad that's inside the piston, you need to keep it in there to compress the piston to compensate for the new pads and rotors. In our case, we were saving these pads, so we put a rag in between it and then used the channel locks to compress it, and you just squeeze until it doesn't go anywhere anymore. Once you have compressed the piston, you can remove the pad. Now that the caliper is out of the way, you need to remove the two mounting bolts for the caliper mounting bracket. These are usually on there very tight, but ours were off recently, so they were fairly easy. I just used my hand and hit it a couple times. You will probably need to use a breaker bar if they have been on there for a while. Once you have them loose, you can remove them by hand and remove the bracket from the car. In our case, there are two metal clips that push on, so we just pried them away a little bit with a screwdriver and then twisted them off. A lot of the time there will be a bolt in between the two studs that you need to remove for the caliper to come off. Generally, your rotor will be stuck on really tightly and you can't remove it at this point, so if you screw on the lugs loosely, so when you start hammering at it you do not mess up the threads, you can hit around the outside edge. Do not hit on the braking surface.
There it goes. There it goes.
As you can see, it only took me a couple hits to get it to break free. Generally it'll take a little more. Just hit a couple times, rotate it, and go all the way around until it pops off. Then you can remove the lugs and take the rotor off the car. Rust tends to build up around this edge, and that's what keeps the rotor on, so you want to use a wire brush and clean it up before you put a new rotor on. When you receive your rotor, it will generally be in a bag like this full of oil. The oil is to keep the rotor from rusting during transportation. You need to clean this oil off, so use brake clean and a rag. Your caliper mounting bracket will probably have some built-up debris. You need to clean this out so the pads do not stick. Now put your rotor back on the car and the caliper mounting bracket. Tighten the caliper mounting bracket down to the torque spec according to the manufacturer. This is really important because it is what holds your brakes to the car. Because this is a floating caliper, it has slides that move back and forth as the pads wear down. So you need to remove these slides and grease them up. Once you have greased them up, put them back into place. Here we used white lithium grease. This is important to ensure that one side does not seize up and wear your pads unevenly. The brake pads also need some lubrication to keep them from binding up. We used anti-seize. You want to put it around where the piston will sit on the pad and then on the edges at the end where it sits in the mounting bracket. You don't need much, just smear a light coat on and then put the pads into place. Make sure you do not get any anti-seize on the braking surface. When you go to push the pad inside of the piston, you're going to want to wear clean gloves so you do not get any anti-seize on the braking surface. Just line it up and push, and then check around to make sure it's all the way in. You can now put the other pad in and put the caliper on top. You always want to start by threading these bolts in by hand. They are very easy to strip out. Then you can tighten them with a wrench and torque them down. When they are torqued, you can put the dust boot covers back